panel with a lot of women representation, so I want to give some excitement to that, and maybe we can give them a round of applause. But before I hand it over to them, I just want to kind of set the scene real quick. Financing is a really interesting subject when it comes to entrepreneurs, mainly because whenever you ask an entrepreneur, what is your biggest problem? The very first thing that they say, without even leaving a second of pause, is financing. I don't have money. But one of the things that we explored last time is that may not always be the case. That's the thing that you're saying, but there may be other issues that are there that we haven't explored yet. So hopefully we'll dig into these and also kind of talk about various sources of funding, how you can access funding in this panel. Before I fully hand it over to the panel, it's good for us to understand who is in the room so that we can hopefully give you the information that's relevant to you. So the first thing I want to ask, just by a raise of a hand, how many of you in here are an entrepreneur and are running your own business? Okay, so a few. How many of you or do we have any students in the room? A couple students, okay, cool, a couple students. Anyone that is employed at the moment and considering joining the entrepreneurship scene? Okay, so we can assume then, based on that and the fact that we also have students in the room, we have a lot of people who are at the idea phase, and then we have some people who are fully in the business phase. So great, I'll leave it at that for the introduction. What I want to do now is just kind of introduce our panelists, and then give them a chance to introduce themselves. But just from my right to my left, your left to your right, I have Kapemba here, who's representing Luce. We Chill, who is representing Kavmont Bank. And we have Dr. Irene, who's representing Tukuza. So I'll just hand it over to you for a brief introduction of yourself, and who are you, and also how does your organization or institution relate to this conversation?
Okay, as I was introduced just now, my name is Kapemba Lenka Mwambazi. I'm from the Lusaka Securities Exchange. I'm from the Business Development Department, and I have my colleague here, Phil, who was in the previous session. Well, we have, or rather the Luce is a platform where businesses and also just individual investors can come and raise capital. And we established this small tier for small to medium enterprises in a growth phase 2.5 years ago now. It's called the Alternative Investment Market. So this is specifically just for SMEs. We have our main board where we have all our main listed companies, just like Kavmont here. But the alternative market is specifically just for SMEs. So we are in the right place with the right people.
Great. I'm Chill from Kavmont Bank, your superstar local bank. We are here because, well, we're the bank, and everybody thinks that they're going to walk into the bank and get a loan for their idea or their business. And I think one of the reasons we're also here is to also show you that financing is not just borrowing, and that's not necessarily the right thing for startups, SMEs, or anybody until they're ready, and to see how else the bank can help, can work with everybody to grow in a non-debt way.
My name is Irene Banda. I am here representing Tukuza Associates, which is a private company that is really interested in business development from the point of how do you get a business idea to actually fit into a market where they can tempt themselves to be a commercial business. We do this at the level of the community, but what's of interest in my being here today is at the SME level, from the time that you have an idea. And one of the things that is of real concern to us is how do you get the support that you need in order to be able to absorb financing that will grow your business. And to that effect, we have actually partnered with Bongo Hive that have got an incubator, but also at the same point looking at making available funding, creating opportunities for funding for businesses that are at startup level.
Great, so again, just to set the scene, I'm going to encourage each of you. I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible. So please, as you're listening to their answers, as you're listening to the conversation that's going on, if you have questions, please raise your hand and let us know. We want to be giving you information that's relevant to you, not just what we think is best for you to hear. And I said this in the first panel, but I'll say it again. You know, as we're having these conversations, if you want to have these conversations among yourselves, if you want to challenge what somebody else is saying, you know, that's how we get some, you know, rich and deep conversations. So please let's not just think of this as a presentation. It's more of a discussion that we're having. I'm just gonna ask the first question and then kind of see where we go from there. It's a similar one that I asked in the first panel, but I'm gonna add one piece to it. Basically, the first part of the question is at what stage of a business should it be looking for external funding? But in addition to that, at the different stages of a business, what are the different types of funding they should be looking for? So if there's anyone that wants to take that from the beginning, go for it, or I can ask someone specific.
Well, maybe I can start so that I add on to your second part as well.
Sure.
Firstly, and maybe I think Irene will talk a little bit into maybe when we're ready sort of thing. But firstly, we always assume that we have a great idea, and if we just had the money, all 15 million Zambians would come and get our product, right? We all think that, but that's not the reality. And so what you have to make sure that when you're ready for not an investor, but financing, okay? An investor is somebody who can come with you from the beginning. Yes, they're putting their money into you. Maybe there's some deal of eventually they'll own whatever percentage of your company or whatever. But if you come to a bank and say, I want financing, we're just lending you the money and you're expected to pay back with 25% interest, okay? That's just the bottom line. So what you want to make sure is you ask yourself, and I always say this, and anybody that was here before will hear me say it again, is, can I afford it? Okay? So before you get any sort of loans or anything like that, the first question you've got to ask is, can I afford it? Even on a personal level, can I afford it? If I go and get this 50,000 personal loan from Cavmont Bank at 25% or whatever it is, can I afford to pay 1,600, 1,800 kwacha every single month? But my salary is only 5,000 kwacha. Maybe not, right? So when you really want to look at, okay, is it time for me to go and borrow, especially? Look at your business is now already off the ground. It's now getting into the next phase, not just because you want to rush quickly, okay, and get a second taxi or a second shop or whatever it is. It's already in that next phase. The first phase is now already generating income. And make sure that when you do borrow, your business is paying itself back. You are not paying back the loan from your personal pocket. If you're doing that, you're not ready. Just keep it moving. Just keep going. Walk past the bank, go and just get your check and keep going. You're not ready for that. And that's the mistake we make. We assume, oh, you know what? I make 10,000 kwacha. Hey, I can afford this. But that 10,000 kwacha, most of the time, it's already allocated towards other things. And then once you start doing that, now you're constantly dipping. Why for the loan? Dip into your 10,000 kwacha to get the business off the ground, not to repay a loan that you probably couldn't afford to begin with, or you probably didn't need right away.
I'm just going to take a quick pause so we actually have a new panelist who's just joined us, Mr. Gito Kayumba from Kukula Capital. I've already given everyone else a chance to just introduce yourself, but also your company and why it's relevant to this conversation. And the conversation that we're having is financing in startups, or financing growth, I should say. So if you want to take a quick minute to introduce yourself.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much. My name is Gito Kayumba. I'm a partner at a company called Kukula Capital. It's a local private equity / venture capital firm that's been in existence since 2009. It's the only locally domiciled private equity fund. We've invested in about 9 different entities over the last, close to 7 years or so. And really the business model of what venture capital is with the capital that we have, we invested in businesses in exchange for shareholding, so as opposed to the debt model, which is what the banking sector has. And we accrue value to our shareholders and ourselves by essentially drawing earnings from the dividends of the entities that are in our underlying portfolio, as well as capital gains of once we build up the companies, we exit. So let's say we do a secondary sale to another private equity fund. We could list the company on the stock exchange. We can sell back, put in a put option or something of that nature, sell back to the entrepreneur who essentially started the business if they have the means to buy us out at the point where the valuation is relatively high, or we can do a trade sale, which is very lucrative, where you sell the whole company, let's say to an investor, to a competitor, sorry. So that's really what Kukula Capital is and what private equity is. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thanks.
So I'm a little bit frazzled because I was dragged out of the corridor.
You'll be all right, don't worry. All right. Matt, I just wanted to explain your second part real quick before
Yeah,
somebody takes
let me
over.
just repeat the question so everybody
Okay.
we're on the same page,
Yeah.
and then I'll throw it back to you. So the question was basically, at what stage is a business ready for investment, and conversely, at the different stages, what are the different types of investment they should be looking at? So, yeah, go ahead.
So from bank, and like I said, borrowing is different from investing, okay? So everybody thinks they're gonna get a loan, all right? So loans, overdraft versus working capital. Sometimes we have what we call invoice discounting. Invoice discounting is Zesco says I need 5 million bulbs, and somehow you get the contract, but you don't have money for those 5 million bulbs. So you bring your invoice from Zesco, a reputable organization that can show that, yes, they're able to pay you, and then we will give you maybe 50% of that money or 60%, whatever it is, to make your purchase and go and deliver to Zesco. So that's still fairly new in the market because our market just isn't mature enough for that yet. Working capital, working overdraft, this is now when you have a viable company and you need to work your operations. Okay, let's say you're listed and your money maybe is in the stock exchange or it's in assets or things, but you still have to pay your employees, you still have to put fuel in the cars, you still have to do that. So you need to work 200,000 kwacha every month to run the business, all right? But you're maybe not getting paid that much on time. So you just got to make sure that we've got this 200,000. So you get your working capital or your working overdraft that you take out, we replenish. You take out, we replenish. It's always constantly there, unless of course you begin to default and stuff like that. But what it is as long as your business is viable and it's working, you're just paying back your working capital. And of course, loans are a little bit more long term. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and now that we're working to 65, soon you will be seeing 20-year loans, all right? And they generally are for very big projects. The shorter ones, maybe not, but where you see like 10 years, 15 years, it's like a massive project and we need lots and lots, we're talking in the millions of dollars kind of thing, and then they're a little bit longer to pay back.
Dr. Ian, let me address the question to you. When somebody's at an idea stage, or they've just started out, maybe 1, 2 employees, what types should they be looking for capital, and what types if they are?
Actually, I'm glad we've sort of started talking about the options that we have. You can, actually 2, maybe 3. You can go for equity, you can go for debt. So equity, they're going to come and talk about what they're going to give you in exchange for a stake in your company. And when you go for debt, you're getting a loan. In some instances, you might be able, we are seeing more and more some donors coming in with a grant, but those are highly, highly competitive, and you do need to satisfy conditions. USAID and some of the donors have been on the market talking about supporting SMEs. So the question then is, at what point are you ready for what? And I think that's a question that you need to address as a business owner, which means that you need to understand all the options in relation to where your business is. And at idea stage, and I've been working at idea stage maybe for the last 5 years, one thing that we have recognized is that at that point, you are really trying to understand the nitty-gritties of your business. You are even trying to understand why you are doing this business. Remember, for a business to be a business, you need to have some income coming. And so the question is, who is going to buy your product or service? What problem have you identified? People pay for solutions, they're not paying for your hobbies. So what solution, what problem are you trying to address? So at that level, you need to realize, if I am really just entertaining an idea. I want to operationalize it. Do I really have a story that I can talk to an investor or a bank about? Most likely not. And it is at that point that we're actually talking about bootstrapping. What do you need to sell that TV? You might want to
No more
think twice about
DSTV.
TV. You might need to think about how do you look after this baby you are calling your business. You've started it, and therefore you need to fund it. That's definitely not the time for you to start bringing in external parties until you have a story to tell. What does it mean for you? It means, therefore, that you are going to be the one that does everything in that business in order to be in control of, whatever little money you have put in. You're going to be the CEO, the CFO, the driver, the marketer. You're going to do everything because you need to do that. So at that stage, you are certainly needing to look at what resources do you bring in. Some of the work that we are trying to do now is to see how we can actually help you. Now that help is not putting in money. That help is thinking about, at that point, what structures do you need to put in place? At that point, what kind of documents do you already need to start having? And to try and really hold your hand so that you are ready for external investment, be it debt or equity.
Okay, maybe just to add on to what Doctor has mentioned, with the stock exchange, when you're in your idea phase, as most of you are right now, we're trying to create a dream where the stock exchange is the last place or the apex that you want to come to. So, but with that, we also like to say it's a business decision for you to come onto the stock exchange. We're not forcing anybody. We want you to make that decision to say, okay, I would like to use this alternative to raise capital. But with that, there are certain things that you need to have in place. Your documentation. Obviously, people are putting money into your business, so we don't want a business that comes in today, the following day, people's monies are out the window. So you need to be in a place where all your finances are in order, and corporate governance as well is a major issue that we're looking at today. We don't want, yes, most of the companies that are startups are family owned, but with that, if you have board of directors, we want majority of those directors to be non-family, because we don't want people discussing these things on the family table and saying, okay, tomorrow we've made a profit, then tomorrow you're going to get a house in Chalala or whatever it is. So there needs to be corporate governance that people need to follow, and so with that, there are certain things that you need to look at. You don't just come to the stock exchange and say, okay, I've thought of my idea and I want to raise capital today. So we're looking at a size of SME. So the minimum annual turnover we're looking at is 250,000 to a maximum of 20 million. So that's the size we're looking at as SMEs.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to try and throw it over to you if you have questions. And it's actually going to go to both you, Kapembwa, and Jito. The first, when we heard Chil and Dr. Irene talk about, Chil was talking about debt financing. Irene was mostly talking about bootstrapping and how pulling together your resources to see what you can do. The two of you mainly represent the idea of equity financing. Do we understand the difference between that? Who would like that explained? Okay, can somebody give us a 30 second, 1 minute?
Okay, very simply, equity is just ownership, it's shareholding, and debt is ngongole, right?
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, so equity would be you sell off a piece of your business and raise money for that. So my question though is, so you two are both looking at that. My question is simply, what would be the difference between looking at something like listing on something publicly versus private equity, venture capital? Why would somebody look at one or the other? What is the difference?
Okay.
It's a bit of a tough question.
Okay, so at what stage, because I heard you talk a bit about startups and ways in which they need to raise capital.
So would there be a difference at different stages?
Absolutely. So I'm sure Dr. Irene probably already talked about just the various avenues that startups have for raising capital. The sad reality is that because of the risk factors that come in having a startup. Sourcing capital for startups is very difficult. Investors just don't look at it, unfortunately. As much as I'm passionate about people coming through to my office with great ideas that are non-existent, they're just literally in their minds or they're on a piece of paper. Now, naturally, of course, maybe just to avoid repetition, I don't want to go into ways in which you can start, because I'm sure that's already been covered. But with regards to the differences and the mechanisms of raising equity, so when you're looking at private equity as a means to raise capital, the first thing you need to have in place, I think you alluded to putting financials in order. I think, and the way you do that practically is by maintaining management accounts, keeping them, being very meticulous with that. Management accounts are very important because myself and my team would be assessing that to see how viable a business is. So the historical precedent is very important to establish the trends, the trajectory. So when you're putting capital, our mindset is what assets are we going to acquire that will generate more cash, that will scale this business to a point that its EBITDA goes up to a point where we can exit at a much higher multiple, as in higher valuation, so we can make a good return for ourselves and our investors, of course. So keeping meticulous accounts is very important. And then, of course, at the end of the year, having it audited by a relatively reputable audit firm. I know big companies who, in some cases, I know, I'll tell you a funny story. A massive company, we couldn't believe it. The auditor is some guy in Kawambwa, who, and he's like, I don't even know, so the credibility wasn't there. So, you've got mid-tier audit firms who have, it is costly, it is an expense, but it's worth it, because once we have those audited accounts, we're able to utilize that to see how we can gauge the future, and we have ways in which we analyze the market and so on, and how we can grow the business. And in most cases, that's also what you need to list on the Lusaka Stock Exchange. And in addition to that, governance, which is what you mentioned, is extremely important. And practically speaking, what is governance? It's really, so to zoom out, just in simple terms, you need to have one layer at the top, which is a board. The board are responsible for overseeing the company. So basically holding the management accountable. We have situations where when we invest in companies where the board is basically husband and wife, and sometimes in many cases the decisions are unilaterally made by the husband. So, and the reason why, and you might ask yourself, why does a venture capital fund or investors investing through the stock exchange want governance in place? Is because human beings have the propensity to be very naughty when they are given money and there's no one watching that money. You might find or invest in Phil's company, next thing is in Dubai, having a good time. Now, the board is what will ensure that doesn't happen. Because when certain purchases are done, so let's say, for example, for expenditure over 50,000 kwacha, needs, let's say, board approval. For hiring, we have to make sure that each employee has contracts, so everything is legally reviewed. Making sure that, let's say you're not having issues of, let's just say, sexual harassment, let's say, in the company. You've got all these principles that drive corporate culture, that ensure that the company is running in the most prudent, most efficient way possible, that integrity is sustained, you're protecting the company's image, you're ensuring that, if you've got regulatory exposure. So let's say, for example, we've got a company in our portfolio called Betanal Finance. It's got massive regulatory exposure to Bank of Zambia, so you have to ensure that we're following the Bank of Zambia guidelines. And that's what the board does, because the management are employed by the company, and if anything goes wrong, the company, they'll still get their check at the end of the day. Yeah. So someone has to be liable on behalf of the investors. And this is how the board come together, is the investors identify these individuals who basically provide that oversight. So that's really what it is. And then, of course, the practical elements of it is having quarterly meetings, having an AGM, ensuring that all the proceedings are recorded, and so on. So that's what enables investors to be comfortable that this business is running properly. And just one last point, I don't want to go too much, say too much about this, is we've invested in companies purely on the fact that they've got good governance. We didn't really care about the business model. Some people believe that they need to have the shiniest business plan in order for us to invest. Because we know that even if this company is making a return of, 12%, nothing too attractive for Sub-Saharan Africa where we expect much higher returns. And we've invested because we knew that no matter what, we don't have to spend too much time watching the books with these guys, because we know that the board is very diverse. There's external members and so on who are running it efficiently. And then ultimately, and then there's perhaps, you're from the stock exchange, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so, yeah, perhaps I can hand over to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so he's mentioned on VC, which is venture capital, and which we want, and that's how it actually works. Well, you come and exit. You get financing from the venture capitalist, and then you come and exit on the stock exchange. So that's how they work. Then with public listing, you actually get your financing from the general public. So as an SME, you have to keep in mind that when you're coming onto the stock exchange, you're becoming a public company. So your financials will have to be disseminated to the general public. Everybody has to know your business. And that's how investors will be, trusting of your company and to invest more and more each time. So with that, how does this work? You come to the stock exchange, you apply formally for listing. So the stock exchange will review your documentation, make sure that your documents are in order. You also have to register your securities with the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as register your company with PACRA, from being a private company to public. And I think in our earlier session, we mentioned that we want the stock exchange to be a one-stop shop. So when you come to us, you get a list of your costs. We don't want you to go to PACRA, then you go to the SEC, you go to LAS, to ZICA, to get all the different costs. You come to the stock exchange and we give you all of that. So with SMEs, what we're trying to do is actually reduce the cost of listing, because clearly coming onto the main listing board is very expensive. I mean, government can tell you that. They've been on the stock exchange for quite some time. But with SMEs, we're trying to reduce the requirements for listing, but still maintain the high standards that the main listings board has, and reduce the costs with that. So LAS, we can give you a lawyer that can look at your documentation and hold you through the whole process of listing, as well as ZICA. We can offer you pro bono work with an accountant, and PACRA as well, because even registering your securities with PACRA as well is quite expensive. So we're trying to engage with them and make sure, at least when these companies are coming to register their securities, it should be at a cost that maybe they can pay later on once the company has grown and made their money.
Great. So, and just one thing that I'd love to add on to that, in terms of listing, an advantage of listing publicly is that you then have a lot of stakeholders in the community, right?
Yeah.
If, for example, Cavmont has a number of people who've invested in them, now you know that most of them are going to go and actually bank at Cavmont.
Yeah.
So you actually end up with a lot of customers who come back. They're going to say, I actually own this company, so I'm going to also be a customer.
And you have rights, even if you own 0.09% of
Yep.
the company. Yeah.
Right. So that's just kind of an overview.